A young woman got a summer job as a maid at a hotel in a small village right before tourist season began. 19 days later, her decomposed body was found hidden under a pile of rocks. Trude Espos was born in Orkanger, Norway, sometime in late 1975. Little information is available on her background, but based on what is known, she likely enjoyed traveling. At Finnmark University College in Alta, she studied 2 years' worth of English and Russian, which would have helped her immensely in her travels. While in Alta, newspapers stated that she worked in the environment. This likely played a role in her choice of a summer job. On July 31, 1996, Trude, now 20 years old, was hired as a maid at the Hotel Union in the small village of Geiranger. Geiranger was a small and scenic village and one of Norway's most well-known tourist spots due to its natural beauty. It was also the setting for the 2015 movie The Wave. Normally, Geiranger has a population of around 250, but during the summer, that population can jump up to 3,000. For the 1996 tourist season, it reached 5,000 people, 98% of whom were foreign, tourists who had likely never been to the area before nor likely to return once the season was over. August 8th was Trude's day off, and at around 3:45 in the afternoon, she went into the center of Geiranger to enjoy her day off in the town. She then went to the local grocery store. She was then observed sitting on a viewpoint rock just outside Geiranger. That was the last confirmed sighting of Trude that day. On August 9th, a hotel housekeeper went to the police to report Trude missing, as she had not been to work that day. Because of Geiranger's natural landscape, a fjord surrounded by mountains, it was feared that she either fell or suffered some other accident. The police didn't waste much time forming a massive search party. A search party that utilized sniffer dogs and helicopters on just day one alone. On August 10th, a man entered the police station carrying a handbag and a book he had found. The two objects were found on a separate rock adjacent to a highway just outside of Geiranger. At some point, Trude got up from the rock, crossed the road, and climbed a hiking trail above the road. Therefore, the police now knew to focus their search efforts in that area. On August 12th, the police had permission to search the dormitory adjacent to the hotel where Trude lived. Inside, the police found her passport and wallet, which suggested that she likely intended to come back. In her dorm was also a note. On August 2nd, she had made 4 notes on a piece of paper. They said Elin Store, German, crutches. Elin was the employee who was training her. The store was likely the one she was last seen at. But German and crutches they could not decipher the meaning of. On August 13th, a man found a red t-shirt along the road. It was the same shirt Trude was last seen wearing. Professional divers also scoured the fjord and other surrounding waterways but found nothing of note. By now, the police were under the belief that foul play must have been involved in Trude's disappearance, and they had already questioned 11 people, but none of them wound up being involved. The search was then expanded to mostly all of Geiranger. Officers from outside the immediate area, including officers from Kripos, were called in. 70 members of the Norwegian Red Cross were mobilized, and police searched along the entire roadside and combed just about every beach. By August 18th, tourists who had heard what had happened voluntarily gave up their cameras, leaving police with over 1,000 photos to sort through. They had hoped that one of them may have unknowingly captured Trude after her last known sighting, but to no avail. Despite the immense effort and resources put into finding Trude, the police were ultimately at a loss and failed to find her. On August 19th, an elderly married couple, both locals of Geiranger, were out for an evening walk along the highway. Once their walks took them by a pile of rocks, they were suddenly struck by a foul odor. They followed the smell and found themselves at a pile of loose stones and rocks about 100 meters away. They saw a pair of white shoes sticking out from under a pile of rocks. They decided not to go any closer or remove the rocks and instead called the police. The police arrived, sealed off the area, and began removing the rocks one by one. That was not a quick task, as whatever was buried underneath the stones was covered very thoroughly. Eventually, the police uncovered the decomposing body of a young girl. The body was identified as Trude, although the cause of death was never Publicly disclosed, it is believed she had been strangled. It was also said that Trude had been raped. Unfortunately, because of the heavy decomposition, the police struggled to place the time of death reliably. The police also found foreign hairs on Trude's socks. The police were only able to create a partial DNA profile with it. It was tested against the DNA of all the local males in Geiranger, but none of them matched. It was deemed unlikely that she was killed on the rock she was seen sitting at, especially because it was out in the open and thus there would be many witnesses if anything did happen there. The police, in fact, knew exactly how many people would pass by. The rock was near a road, and police were conducting traffic control at the time. They estimated that 2.5 cars were driving by every minute. Walking trails were nearby as well, and the boats in the fjords would have a clear enough vantage point too. There was one part of the path, though, just below the crime scene where the path rose slightly and thus was obscured from the main road and the walking trails. The police believed the murder likely happened here. If this murder had occurred any other time of the year, solving it wouldn't be that difficult with the relatively small population. But now, 98% of the suspect pool were foreign tourists who wouldn't be staying long, didn't speak the language, and might have already left. The police attempted to map out the identities of all the tourists and vehicles in Geiranger on August 8th. They secured the guest list for all the hotels, motels, and campsites, and everyone who had used a credit card was registered and put into a police database. Unfortunately, many of the tourists visiting were still allowed to leave Geiranger, and there was not one thing the police could do to stop them, or even know they left. Luckily, it didn't take long for their first suspect to emerge. One of the hotel's employees came forward with a statement to the police. They were one of the witnesses who saw Trude on the rock. While lying down, she saw a man at the edge of the forest. The man sat still and stared at the witness for 20 minutes. Once she stood up from the rock, he followed behind Trude. He then asked, "What time is it?" in German. They described him as unpleasant. Afterward, he walked toward the rock Trude was last seen sitting at. She described this man as pale, clean-shaven, and appeared to be Northern European. He stood at 185 meters tall, had a normal body build, gray-blue eyes, and dark brown hair. He was dressed in light shorts and a short-sleeved polo shirt with horizontal stripes, blue on a white background. A sketch of this man was soon put together. Next, a Swedish couple on a camping trip in Geiranger came forward. They were on a walk when they saw a woman sitting on a rock, this woman almost certainly being Trude. Later, they walked by the same rock and saw her gone. After a few meters, one had to go relieve himself. They went up a footpath alongside the highway, and halfway up the path, they heard a scream which they said sounded like a child's scream. One didn't want to investigate out of potential fear or a belief that it was just a playful scream from a child playing with his parents, but her husband persisted. He eventually found himself around 30-40 meters away from what he thought was a child lying against a cliff. He also saw another man standing above them. He eventually noticed the husband, and the two looked at each other for a while before the husband finally left to pee. He had simply assumed the man to be the child's father, and when he returned, both were gone. All of this had gone done roughly 20 meters away from where Trude's body had been found. The sketch of the German man was shown to the Swedish couple, and the husband said he thought the face looked a little familiar, but couldn't be entirely sure. Meanwhile, his wife never got a good look at the man in question to begin with. Another thing of note was an older model of an American blue car with temporary plates. Such a vehicle was seen in Geiranger on the day Trude disappeared and hadn't shown up again. Perhaps they were just passing through or nobody noticed them on any other days, but the police are also interested in speaking to the owner of that car. That German man was the police's primary lead, and they spared no expense in trying to track him down. But it was all for naught. The police had questioned over 4,000 witnesses from 40 countries, including neighboring nations like Sweden all the way to far-off nations like South Korea, with many interpreters called in to help. The police also received and followed up on 1,800 tips, despite their best efforts. The police didn't get any closer to naming a suspect. In July 2017, the case was featured on a German TV show due to the likelihood that the murderer was the mysterious German man. After the episode aired, a man contacted the staff of a Norwegian TV show called Osted Norge. and said he might be able to help. On August 2nd, 1996, he had been vacationing in Geiranger and took 3 photos especially that may be of use. One of them, taken on August 2nd, depicted a man with only one leg using crutches. These pictures were shown to locals, and one of them, a woman who was 16 and working at a kiosk at the time, said she recognized him. The man acted very creepily toward her and asked a bunch of personal questions such as where she lived and how far away her house was. The man was also speaking German. While it did likely explain the notes left in her diary, the police do not believe him to be the killer. He did not resemble the sketch, and the other German man did not use crutches and had both of his legs. Disposing of Trude's body would have been very difficult, if not impossible, to do with the other German's disability. The police also took hair samples from hundreds of tourists who could be tracked down again. They were compared against the DNA profile from the hairs, but none of them matched. The police also had 15,000 pictures and 300 videos to go through, and so many more were sent forward as people rediscovered their old vacation photos. Over 500 separate people of various nationalities sent in the aforementioned pictures and videos. So even 20 years after Trude's murder, the police were still sorting through various photographs and footage for any potential leads. The police also spent over 13 million kroner on the investigation. In November 2017, they came across a photo overlooking the fjord with about 5 boats on the water. The photo was dubbed the 5:15 photo, as the boats left the port at 5:15 p.m. Police were able to digitally enhance the photo and saw a small red dot on the rock Trude was sitting on. The dot was likely her red t-shirt. Before this photo, the last known sighting of Trude was at 5 p.m. A second photo of the same spot was taken at 5:26, and by then, Trude was gone. Therefore, the police pieced together that Trude left the rock between 5:15 p.m. and 5:26 p.m. This narrowed down her time of death and matched the statement made by the Swedish couple. In May 2023, a woman came forward and said her son had confessed to the murder. In November 1999, she was questioned and said her son confessed during a heated argument, meaning this was in fact the second time she came forward. He also told her that he was in Geiranger that day without anyone knowing about it and was driving an old blue car he had rented. Supposedly, he had put his hand over her mouth after she started screaming during consensual sex and wanted to silence those screams as he was scared passers-by would think he was raping her. He kept his hand over her mouth until he wound up suffocating her by accident. The problem, he was already dead by the time of both confessions, so he had no means of defending himself. The car was not the smoking gun one would think, as 2 of the same model were in the area, and witnesses were inconsistent on what color the license plates were. But most of all, everyone else who knew him said that was straight up impossible, and that his mother was lying. He worked at Sognsvann in Oslo and was there on August 8th as well, giving him an alibi. Furthermore, nothing was able to link him to Geiranger that day. His bank card wasn't used, nobody had seen him. He hadn't gone to any local stores, board or any boats, the police never saw him when they were questioning everybody they saw, and so on. He did travel to Geiranger on August 8th, 1997, the 1-year anniversary of Trude's murder, but the police believe that to be a coincidence and nothing more. He often traveled across Norway and only did so with his friends, so going there alone would be highly out of character. The police also checked with the Norwegian Public Roads Administration to see if he may have rented or had access to a blue American car with temporary plates. Nothing in their records indicated that. In 1996, he leased a dark green local vehicle. Based on her 1999 interview, the police were already considering him, but by 2023 they were able to rule him out definitively. Either he lied to his mother during that argument in a public place that no other witnesses attested to, or for some reason, his mother lied about him after his death. Trude's family was so desperate for a resolution that for a brief while they considered that Tony Alexander King might be responsible. Tony was a serial rapist from the United Kingdom, who is now serving life imprisonment for the murders of Rocio Waninkoff and Sonia Carabantes in Spain. However, nothing shows that he was in Norway at the time. The most recent lead was in April 2024, when the Norwegian Ministry of Justice worked with the South Korean authorities to track down 27 additional South Korean tourists to hear their testimony. It was a joint effort that began in October 2023. Only 16 were found and none of them had anything of use to say. Nor did their photographs shed new light on the case. That is where this case ends. It remains not just one of Norway's most famous cold cases, but simply cases in general. Trude's mother has stated that even though the killer hasn't been found, she's still satisfied with the police's investigation and has never once accused them of being incompetent. She has come to accept that they tried their absolute hardest but are simply out of leads to pursue. Her exact words were, "I have no complaints about the police's efforts, even if the mysterious German is innocent." The police still believe that the killer was likely one of many tourists and that he likely returned to his home country not long after the murder, possibly before the body was even found.